I'm attorney Casey Walker. I'm the founder of VA Disability Group, and I used to be a VA Disability Compensation and Pension Services adjudicator, otherwise known as a rater. I was the one who gave you your decisions at one point in my life. The purpose of this video is to discuss NEC compensation and pension examinations, otherwise known as C&P examinations. One thing I want to discuss before we get into the actual examination is one thing you need to do before you actually go to the examination. You need to prepare. You need to get your documentation in order. On the day of the exam, that examiner should have everything they need to really do the assessment before even looking or discussing anything with you. Specifically, you can go and you can document symptom logs, which is kind of a diary or a journal. And you can go to our website, they're linked in the description below, and you can document your symptoms. Additionally, give a written statement. Detail every symptom you experience and how frequently you experience it. And lastly, and probably most importantly, be treated. Seek treatment. Be medicated if you need it. Have imaging and objective testing done where needed. Because you don't want to show up on the day of the exam and tell the examiner that you have a nerve impairment if it's never been documented. So that's the homework before the exam, and that's probably the most important part. The examination itself isn't as important as to what you do before the exam. Now let's talk about the actual examination. When you go to the examination, first and foremost, don't embellish, but don't be a tough guy. Just be a straight shooter. They've seen enough examinees over the years where they can tell when someone's being honest in most instances. So don't embellish, but don't be a tough guy. Also, here's what you need to expect at the exam. When you go into the examination, that examiner should ask you for every symptom you've ever experienced, really, and they're going to write it down. They become a scrivener. They write it down, and they write down all your subjective history. Once you've discussed your subjective symptoms with the examiner, they should do a physical examination of you. Ideally, this examination should require them touching you, especially for a joint. Sadly, this doesn't always happen, but you can't control that, so stay within the realm of your control. They should physically examine you. That examination for any joint should involve limitation of motion and ranges of motion testing, where they're bending your neck, they're having you look in different directions. This is standard for all joints. And then there's going to be a diagnosis section of that examination report. You need a diagnosis. Without a diagnosis, you will not be receiving disability compensation. You need a diagnosis. The VA will only compensate disabilities. And then towards the end of the report, they're going to document any treatments you've had. Maybe it's orthotics, maybe it's laboratory testing, maybe it's objective imaging. So the doctor's going to go through your records and document for the adjudicator with the VA what actually exists in the records, because they're the professional. And I say doctor, it could be a nurse practitioner, could be a physician assistant, could be a DO. So there's a host of medical professionals who do these examinations. The goal of this examination discussion is to discuss the common conditions. We're not going to get into really specific conditions because this discussion would last for hours. So I want to talk about arthritis, cervical neck strains with a T, cervical neck sprains with a P, and I want to talk about disc syndromes and arthritis. And then lastly, I want to talk about radiculopathy, which is a nerve impingement or impairment caused by the disc of your neck. So how do we actually get these conditions service connected? Well, you can get it on different theories of service connection, but the most common one is what's called a direct theory of service connection. If you had an injury on active duty and you have a condition today, we need to link that injury to the condition today, the diagnosis today. So that's the most common way. But let's say you had arthritis while on active duty or within a year of separating from active duty to a compensable degree. There's a regulation, 38 CFR 3.309, which states where a veteran has a chronic condition to a compensable degree, which means symptomatic really, within 1 year of separating, that condition must be service connected. Now mind you need the diagnosis of arthritis, which means you need to have been treated and had objective imaging for that arthritis within that 1 year of separation. So that would be a chronic theory of service connection, which is likened to a presumptive condition, but it's not technically a presumptive condition. Another way would be secondary. So let's say you have a right shoulder injury, and that right shoulder injury causes you to handle your neck differently and to act differently, and your gait is altered. Maybe you hold your neck to the side because your shoulder's always hurting. Under such circumstances, you might be able to get service connection for a neck strain secondary to your shoulder condition. So let's take a look at the VA's rating schedule. This is found in 38 CFR 4.71 and 38 CFR 4.124A. Specifically, let's look at the neck. Diagnostic code 5237 covers cervical strains. All neck diagnostic codes, well, at least for the most part, are covered by the same symptoms as demonstrated here. you'll notice that flexion and extension of the cervical spine are the primary ways that you're going to be receiving compensation for your neck. Another way that a veteran can receive compensation, in addition to limitation of motion, is painful motion. An adjudicator must award the minimum compensable award to a veteran where they have painful motion. This is found in 38 CFR 4.59. And one other consideration is functional loss. There's 3 landmark cases found in the description below that describe cases, federal cases, that cover functional loss. There's a lot of overlap in these cases, and it would be too much to go into too much detail with these cases at this time. However, be advised that where you have functional impairment caused by a disability, let's say it's pain, and that pain might prevent you from wanting to bend your knees. You might be able to bend your knee and push through the pain, but it's a functional impact. The VA should compensate you on the limitation of motion where the pain begins, not where you can actually bend your leg to or your neck to in this instance, but where the actual pain begins. And that would be an example of functional impact. Another common thing you see in examinations is known as the DeLuca requirements. What happened in this landmark case is that the court instructed examiners to do 3 separate repetitions of the same joint to see if the 3rd repetition would elicit more discomfort or limitation of motion. So if the examiner has you do the same motion 3 times, it's because of that case. Sometimes veterans can actually bend their elbow, neck, knee, back more because of the loosening from doing multiple motions. But regardless, when they have you do 3 motions, that's the DeLuca requirements, requiring 3 separate range of motion tests. So let's take a look at the DBQ for the neck. We're going to look at sections 3 and sections 6 through 7. The rest of it is what I already mentioned in this discussion. Section 3 is going to cover your range of motion. The examiner is going to take a goniometer, which is a tool to measure your range of motion, and they should measure how far you can move your neck from side to side or front and back, and then document it. And what they document will dictate whether you're eligible for some type of compensation. In addition to that, if you have a limited nominal amount of limitation of motion, but you have pain, that pain alone should make you eligible for compensation. But it's one or the other. It's not both. What the examiner might do is something known as a modality test. One of the common ones for the neck is the Sperling's test. So the point of that video was for you to have an idea as to what a modality test looks like. That's the common one you see with the neck, but there's other types of tests they'll do as well. So if they're manipulating your neck and you have any type of discomfort shooting down your arms or upper extremities, you need to be certain to communicate that. Wince, acknowledge the discomfort, or let the examiner know that doesn't feel good. Because if they do that modality test and you do not communicate that you're discomforted, the examiner will document an unfavorable result stating that you do not have a nerve impairment. And as I mentioned at the outset, if you document it with an EMG, which is a nerve conduction test, that the examiner had in their possession, even if they had an unfavorable finding, the objective test showing nerve impairment would trump what the examiner would think, and they would likely write a favorable nerve impairment on that examination report. As we continue down the DBQ, we get to section 7, which is the actual radiculopathy. Radiculopathy in the VA is broken down into 3 primary sections for the neck. Those are found in diagnostic codes 8510, 8511, and 8512. It's the upper radicular group, the middle radicular group, and the lower radicular group. Let's take a look at those rating criteria. So as demonstrated in diagnostic code 8510, 8511, and 8512, the upper, middle, and lower radicular groups are assessed based on mild, moderate, or severe paralysis or incomplete paralysis of that upper cervical nerve. There's a lot of subjectivity there. It's really going to be based on what you communicate to the examiner as he does some of his modality testing. He needs to see that you're very discomforted, and he might be more likely to check a moderate or severe box because of your communication. So some other special considerations. The VA will only compensate a muscle impairment or your joint impairment. They will not compensate both. This is a very strict rule. So if you do have muscle weakness, you only receive compensation for the muscle impairment or the joint. 9 times out of 10, the joint compensates more. So if you do not receive something for the muscle impairment, that is why. Another consideration is nerves, nerves, nerves. If you have some type of upper extremity nerve impairment that's attributable to your cervical spine and your neck, you need to get it documented, and you need to communicate that on the day of the examination. In most instances, the cervical spine in and of itself will only compensate at 10%. However, the left and right upper extremities can compensate at 20% respectively per extremity. And then you also get something known as the bilateral factor added onto the back end of that, which is a discussion for another day. So it's paramount and critical that you communicate any type of nerve impairment you have going down your upper left and right extremities. Another thing to be aware of when you go into the examination is a lot of examiners like to do some type of trick to see if you are being credible and honest with them. For example, you might come in saying that you can't climb a ladder, you can't look up, you can't change a light bulb, your life is over because you can't bend your neck anymore. And then they ask you to grab something above their head. Or maybe they look up at a light to see if you'll look up. And they want to see how simple and easy you can just ambulate. And you could get caught in a little bit of a trap there. So just be advised, don't fall for those tricks. They are common. I hear it all the time from our clients, that the examiner dropped the pencil in front of them, the examiner dropped something in front of them to see if they'd bend over, or they had them look up. So those are common. And in closing, I want to repeat, the examination day is not a day to be a tough guy. You need to make sure the examiner knows that you have discomfort, pain, and limitation of motion. Keep it simple, stupid. Pain, limitation of motion, and your nerves. If you have a nerve impairment, numbness, tingling, sharp shooting pains on your upper extremities, you have to let them know. Everything outside of that probably won't lead to much more for you. So those should be your focuses if applicable. Document, document, document. As stated at the outset, get the documentation to the examiner before you go in for that exam. You can hand carry it in as well. We instruct our clients to do that. Carry all the evidence with you as you go into the exam, because sometimes the examiner won't even look at the records. But if they're holding it in their hand, they're going to be in a tough position not to look at it. So that's it for the compensation and pension examination covering the neck. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, subscribe to our channel and check out the description for all the links we discussed here today. Have a great day.